What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Early Read Week 7 preview. And I said at the end of the Week 6 episode, like pretty low-key week it looks like, which probably means there's going to be chaos where nobody expects it. And that was exactly the case. You have a handful of top 10 teams go down to unranked opponents. You have Miami go the distance. You have a top 10 team in Missouri prove that they are so far from a top 10 team, losing to what might be a top 10 team in Texas A&M. A ton of fallout from last week, obviously headline from Tennessee and Alabama going down as well. I want to bring on Nick Allen at CFB Winning Edge to break down this, what happened last week, what's going to happen, and what it feels like almost falls to the background now with a huge week ahead of some major consequential games. Nick, how's it going, man? Welcome back to the show.
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
So let's go back real quick, and we'll do my guy, not my guy in a little bit. But last week, did you have maybe some questions about some of these top teams going on the road to face some of these what were projected to be outclassed opponents? Or were you thinking, all right, like we got week 7 on the horizon, week 8 also looking crazy? Like what were your thoughts going into last weekend?
Yeah, I to be honest, and I don't consider myself, clairvoyant or anything like that, but it wasn't a complete shock to me that the slate that we were given with really, only one ranked versus ranked matchup, no real, must see game, and it was just one of those weeks where, coming in, it just seemed like, not the most exciting week of college football was ahead, but also we had quite a few, highly ranked teams going on the road in some somewhat tricky situations. Those are the kind of weeks that oftentimes will pop up and give us one of the, best on-field weeks of the season, with a lot of upsets, a lot of chaos, a lot of close calls, however it ends up working out. It seemed like, we should be prepared for it going in. At least that was sort of my mindset. Haven't seen some similar weeks play out in previous years.
Yeah. And before we do my guy, not my guy, I want to ask you just big picture, because now Georgia gets knocked off. Alabama gets knocked off. Tennessee, that I at least put them in that category, at least like on the bottom of that top tier of teams that could potentially compete, let's say Final Four, national championship like situations. Texas hasn't been tested, but Red River always seems to be competitive, even if Oklahoma's down this year. Ohio State is their first real test. I'm just curious, where do you stand with the top of college football right now? Because I had Justin McLeese on last week, and we were discussing, and I thought, to me, what the Georgia-Alabama game showed is just that everyone is just closer to each other than maybe prior years and what we had been used to, because Georgia was seen as the clear top choice and maybe bring them down a little bit rather than necessarily elevate Alabama. Any thoughts on the top of college football? I'm talking more like when we get to the end of the season than right now.
Sure. I wouldn't be the first to say this, but it seems clear that there are no dominant teams in college football this year. There are a lot of really good teams, and there might even be, a team or two, at least on the upper tier, that in some cases are flying a little under the radar. I think Ohio State might be one. In the CFB Winning Edge team strength projections, Ohio State has been our number one team from day one, from our earliest 2024 updates. And honestly, right now, I think like they're playing like the number one team in the country. I know there have been sort of Texas has been number one in the AP poll, Georgia, of course, Alabama last week. And so Ohio State has been a little bit overshadowed by that, cast in the SEC. And I understand it. Ohio State hasn't had a marquee matchup just yet, hasn't had that first real test, as you said. But the way that my numbers work, the talent numbers, Ohio State has been number one, from the preseason until now, especially on the defensive side of the ball. It might be the best defense that I've seen on paper since I started doing this 6-7 years ago. So to me, it's not a shock that this Ohio State team is held on at number one, and I think could still be the team to beat, in part because a lot of the SEC teams are going to continue to play tough tests week in and week out against one another. I have a feeling that the Buckeyes are going to hold pretty steady at number one in my rankings. And of course, we'll see how it all plays out on the field. But right now, I think they have a really good shot to be the final team standing when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I'm happy you brought up Ohio State. And we're obviously going to talk about them against Oregon in what is the biggest game on the slate. I was watching Ohio State Iowa last week, and I just wondered, and it's not a perfect comparison, but I almost, and we'll see. I was Oregon slanted going into this season. I had a few questions for Ohio State, and so far they've answered them, but I almost wonder if there's a little bit of Michigan from last year to this Ohio State roster in terms of, it feels almost like they're just going through the motions and they're just that much better than their competition that it might not be sexy enough, the right word, or it might not be as aggressive or explosive as some of the old Ohio State teams were, that also may not be as good. Whereas I remember Michigan from last year, I kind of got a beat on them early in the season, and we're kind of banging the drum that, okay, I think this Michigan team is actually the best team. Maybe Georgia, but Michigan's a higher rated team. And then we saw as the season went on, maybe it wasn't so explosive, but they were just that much better than everybody, and they navigated through their difficult games with relative ease. I wonder if that's Ohio State this year, where they're just not showing anything because they don't have to. And then when they have to, it's Jeremiah Smith making a one-handed catch, or it's an easy sack, or it's pressure, easy jump the route interception. I just wonder if that's what Ohio State looks like this year.
Yeah, I think it could be. And there's even a little more room for error than usual. I mean, we've seen Ohio State in the past. If a guy is a little bit banged up, they'll hold him out. I think you give yourself, because a two-loss Ohio State team's probably still getting into the playoff. Even more of the potential to rest your top guys if need be, survive week in, week out, don't have to worry about the style points that might have been a concern in years past. Just get to the college football playoff and be rested and healthy, and as much of that as you can, and be in a position to challenge to win it all. So oddly enough, I think that sort of the switch to the 12-team playoff makes it an even better shot for Ohio State to be able to navigate and put itself in position to be best set up health-wise and all of that to compete for a national championship.
Yeah, we'll see. We're going to talk some Oregon, Ohio State in just a little bit. Let's do some my guy, not my guy, though. I'll start because I have a not my guy. And Saturday, props well. Sides and totals continue to be a bit of a grind, but one that really grinds my gears, really pissed me off, was under 48.5 Missouri, Texas A&M, which if you would have told me that there was going to be a blowout on one side, I would have said, okay, that probably means Texas A&M absolutely suffocated them and grinded out like a 30-7 win, 30-3 win, 24-3 win. I didn't think Texas A&M had it in to hang a crooked number like they did. They're up 41-7 with about 4 minutes left, and Missouri starts marching down the field. Last drive of the game, I'm thinking to myself, just one more stop. We're probably home here. They can't get it. Get down to the goal line. Missouri goes for it on 4th and goal from like the 3, maybe it was 3rd and goal. They get a first down at the 1. I'm like, oh my God, just end the game already. Throw a swing pass to Luther Burden, or maybe it was Theo Weiss, out of bounds with 20 seconds left. Don't know why they couldn't just run the clock. Game's over. It's 41-7. We're saying with under 40.5. And then Eli Drinkowitz, who tries to portray himself as like a cool, nerdy type guy. Like, I'm with it. I'm hip. You're down 41-7, man, on the road. You're at the 3-yard line. 12 seconds left. Kicks a field goal. Congrats on your 41-10 loss, pal. Have fun playing UMass this week. So not my guy for sending over the Missouri Texas A&M game, Eli Drinkowitz. Definitely, I've had that was a tough one to swallow, of course, but that one really, especially early slate, like trying to like just get off to a good day, and that really just sent me. I was fuming, but also low key shout out Joe Tessitore being like, well, that was like important to a lot of people watching the game, like because this game is now officially over. So I couldn't help but laugh in my anger at Eli Drinkowitz. Nick, any thoughts on Eli, Mizzou, A&M, anything there?
Well, so I do projections. We've got 3 different models that project against the spread each week, and have one that is on total. So every game, I've technically, I guess, got something on the line. But in one sense, it gets me to where I don't have to pay super close attention to any one particular outcome. So I actually just happened to look at it because I forgot, but I was on the opposite side of that one. It ended up that field goal helped get over 48.5 in our.
So he's your guy of the week.
I guess. I guess. I mean, not the greatest week on totals, not the worst week on totals, but every little bit helps, and definitely have had some previously that was on the wrong side of things. But the game as a whole, our projections were way off. Actually had Missouri favored in that game in all 3 models, and so that was one where I was a little bit of I was a little surprised at that. I've been a little skeptical about Texas A&M. Our numbers do adjust based on injuries, based on projected starters and whatnot, and the fact that Connor Weigman's been out. Texas A&M was not as strong on paper under with Marcel Reed as the starting quarterback, so that was a factor. But even with a fully healthy Connor Weigman penciled in as the starter, our projection still would have been on Missouri to cover in all 3 models, if not favored outright. So that was one that we just absolutely got wrong, just too high on Missouri at this point early in the season. But I guess, maybe he was my guy when on that field goal, me being on the other end of that.
Is A&M they still have tricky games, including Texas. They also have LSU on the docket, a few tricky road games. But like, if that's the level they're going to play at, and I know it's one game, you have to also factor in some other stuff, but Connor Weigman definitely looked healthy. Maybe there was something there early in the season, but I think it's all right there in front of them for them to make a playoff. I think that's back in play. That was something I bet before the season started when Notre Dame got banged up, because I was like, well, if they beat Notre Dame, it's off to the races for them. Obviously a setback, but they're right back in the mix now. Are you upgrading A&M significantly? Or are you just kind of like, well, let's see what happens with them? Any other takeaways before we get your not my guy of the week?
I mean, they've taken a jump. They're up to 13th in our power rankings nationally, playing like a top 20 team. They're 16th in our team performance ratings, which are a stats only number that we put together, top 15 in our roster strength ratings. So Texas A&M is absolutely a legitimate contender, and 13th nationally is still 6th in the SEC, but the schedule sets up really nicely. Get this week off to kind of regroup, get another week off in early November, so that should help keep this team relatively rested and hopefully healthy as well. Do have Texas A&M favored in its next 4 games. They are a slight underdog, kind of oddly maybe, at Auburn heading into that Texas game, so do have Texas A&M as an underdog in its final 2 games, but that may change between now and then. I would fully expect A&M to be favored in that Auburn game if they're able to take care of business between here and there. So absolutely, I think the path is pretty clear, and the opportunity is there for this Texas A&M team to get to double-digit wins, secure that ahead of that matchup with Texas, and who knows what could happen in a rivalry game. Texas A&M absolutely could be in the mix for an SEC title game appearance. If not, maybe have an opportunity to run the table if everything works out well, that final week of the season.
And what about not your guy of the week? Anyone mess with you last Saturday or maybe earlier in the week?
So I'm in a weird or somewhat unfamiliar position because the last couple of weeks were a struggle. They were a bit rough. We had some just absolutely dreadful windows of the season, or excuse me, of the Saturday slate where it just seemed like everything went wrong. Last week was the opposite. Had our best week of the season. Had an evening window that went almost as perfectly as you could hope for. It was like 24-1 from 3:30 on. well, who would have listened? Because prior to that, I mean, we were sub 500 for a few weeks prior to that. But so I'm kind of I'm in a much better headspace this week than I was maybe coming into it. So
you got Coach Drink kicking field goals for you.
I know.
Let me guess, you had Sparty on Friday night too with Jonathan Smith.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. So some of that, some things bouncing the wrong way early on. I guess things end up. They have a way of evening out from time to time. Luck wise, and we definitely had our fair share of good luck this week. So whoever is my guy for that, I guess deserves it.
So you're in a good mood. So who's your guy? There's got to be one guy though that sticks out to you. Who, not Eli Drinkowitz or Jonathan Smith related, but who showed up for you last week that you think deserves some shine?
You go first. Let me dig in a little bit.
So Cam Scatabo, this guy is unbelievable. And Arizona State played early in the week. It was my favorite side of the week. Market against me too, because it went out and then it came back. It kind of condensed around in it. I didn't really see why. I think Kansas, I don't think Kansas is very good. You have Arizona State off a bye. I thought it was a perfect setup for the Sun Devils. Market rated it, small favorite. I thought Arizona State was going to take care of business. They did, but they took the scenic route for sure. A bunch of batted balls, blocked field goals, this and that. The other thing, it was back and forth the whole way, but Cam Scatabo, 182 yards on the ground, game-winning touchdown. This guy is just an absolute terror, and maybe we'll bring up Arizona State, Utah in a little bit, but this Arizona State team is really, really much improved, and I know they lost to Texas Tech in their Big 12 opener, but they post-game win expectancy real close in that one. Arguably should have won the game. I think Texas Tech is kind of running real good right now in terms of their results. But this Arizona State team is much, much improved. I've been upgrading them repeatedly. I have them as a top 40 team in the country. Maybe I'm a little too bullish on them. That seems pretty high, but listen, that's my numbers. Nick, did you catch the Arizona State game? Were you on them? If you were 24-1 in the late window, I hope that the only loss wasn't Arizona State, but I think this ASU team in a Big 12 that is just absolutely wide open. This ASU team, I think, is upper half for sure.
Yeah, and was fortunate to be on the Arizona State side, and at least one of the models. The other two not so. But I was pretty optimistic that we'd see a big step forward for ASU. I wasn't sure it would translate into wins quite like it had, but I thought that the first year under Kenny Dillingham kind of reset, get a little energy sort of infused into the program. Thought that it would really maybe show up first on the recruiting trail. And then, they took their lumps last year. I thought this year would be a far more competitive year, but my expectations were pretty modest coming in. But they're not just competitive. I mean, they are finding a way to win games, and last week was definitely one of them. So, 4-1. The numbers really like ASU again this week. So we'll find out, how far Dillingham and his coaching staff and this team can take it. But I've been really optimistic long term. I think that, the move from, and we might have talked about this when we did our Big 12
Yes,
preview
we were on the
together,
Big 12 preview.
that there's space for a sort of dominant recruiting program to emerge in the Big 12 with Texas A&M with Texas and Oklahoma moving on. And I think Arizona State could have a little bit of an inside track to that. I certainly think there's an opportunity there. So I'm optimistic long term, but to be, to have 4 wins at this point in the season was definitely more and quicker than I expected. But this could be a dangerous team, and Cam Skattebo, one of the more fun players to watch. I mean, does it all. Just a guy who, you want him on the field, you want him on your team, and so far he and this team are putting together some really solid performances.
Yeah, and I think what's surprising, and we don't have to go too long in Arizona State because it sounds like we're going to bring them up later, but the defense is also, and it was pretty good last year, but defense continues to be a real calling card for this team. And Sam Levitt has been just fine. Nothing special, but definitely, I would say, better than expectation. Thank God he beat out Jeff Sims for that job. But, I've been pleasantly surprised at Arizona State, so happy we cashed that one. So, Nick, who's your guy of the week?
All right. So, man, it's tough for me to nail down, but there are a couple of coaches that I like who had some big wins this week, and Sam Pittman in Arkansas, they're able to get it done, knock off Tennessee. Our projections had that closer than felt comfortable, I'll say. I mean, right around a touchdown. We had Tennessee favored in that game. Our talent edge model, which throws out all the stats, throws out everything but our roster numbers, actually kind of surprisingly gave Arkansas a slight edge in that one. Had the Hogs favored to win outright, which to me is like, well, something's wrong there. Obviously, Tennessee's a better, more talented team, but it ended up working out, and that Arkansas team was able to get it done, get a big win. Pittman, just a likable guy, I think. So it was nice to see the Hogs find a way to win that one and just add sort of another layer to that upset week. And 2 others that ended up working out numbers wise. One, we were sky high on Ole Miss, still are. The Kentucky loss was certainly disappointing, maybe a little bit of a wake-up call, we'll see, but I imagine we'll talk about Ole Miss a little bit later. And the numbers just like, man, it's sort of unbelievable where I need to dig in a little bit more to find out if there's just something wrong. But Ole Miss being able to bounce back, go on the road in one of those tough environments, a tricky spot, and not only find a way to win but cover and seemingly get back on track a bit. That defense is really, really playing well, and so I think that there's an opportunity for that to carry over down the stretch potentially. And then finally, one of I struggle with because I do projections and different models for every single matchup. I struggle to select, okay, what's my opinion? What do I really actually feel good about? But one that I did feel good about, good enough that on the Campus to Canton YouTube channel on Saturday mornings, we've got a pregame show, The Tailgate. And I really did like Minnesota against USC. And so PJ Fleck, love him or hate him, he's got a personality that really annoys some people. Other people, including some of his players, really seem to gravitate to. But that just seemed like a great spot. And our projections all had USC favored, but by between 4 and 5 points. And so saw a little value on there. It was a pretty strong signal that the Gophers were going to be able to keep that game close. So for Minnesota to be able to win outright for a local product, true freshman, to get an interception there to seal it is a good story as well. So those three kind of, I guess, stick out to me. Couldn't narrow it down, but where our numbers and maybe some coaches that for whatever reason I have a little bit of a liking for, were able to pick up some big wins.
Yeah, Minnesota was definitely a bet regret for me. Just I had circled the under, and that was before I even looked at like wind or anything. And then that went, and then I was like, do I like Minnesota? I kind of do, and then I just never got around to it. And winner the whole way, clearly the right side. And yeah, USC was a team I was a bit skeptical of going into this season, and seems like, because I thought that this type of Big Ten play, forget the travel and everything they've had already, but just the style of play the Big Ten was going to bring, I thought was going to be a bit of a wake-up call, and it has. A Michigan game, and then Wisconsin, and then Minnesota, and then I got Penn State coming to town. It's definitely a wake-up call, I think, for Lincoln Riley and this more finesse offense. I thought USC, of the new coming Big Ten teams, forget like the coaching turnover, everything, just in terms of pure style, I really thought they were going to have some growing pains. And it's proving to be that, with the way some of these smash mouth teams are kind of bullying them around. And we're going to talk some USC Penn State in a little bit. But great my guy, not my guy. Before we get on to the Week 7 preview, let's talk about Rithmm, our sponsor for today's show. Rithmm is an AI-generated sports betting modeling app. Lets you build your own sports betting models with hundreds of different inputs and a sleek new app. You can download Rithmm, whatever app store you use, and you can use the promo code in the podcast description below. I use Rithmm. I have my pressure run model, 34, 18, and 1 on totals this year with Rithmm's AI generated model. Again, you could use the promo code in the podcast description below to get started. Make sure you sign up with Rithmm today. They support the show. They're really great people. I like Rithmm. You guys should like them too. So again, make sure you sign up with Rithmm today. All right, Week 7, the highly touted week of the season. We have some big time matchups. We're going to get into it. I'm just going to go with what I think is the biggest one on the slate. That's Oregon, Ohio State. Nick, we kind of did the Ohio State spiel at the top. Oregon, I mentioned before, that was where I made a stance in the preseason. I like Oregon. I took a shot on them to win the Big Ten. Not dead, but I definitely feel worse about Oregon now after watching, 5 games than I did before the season. I personally think some of that comes with just the offensive line injuries, and that this team is never going to be its full form, given what we were projecting in, call it July. I think Dylan Gabriel has been somewhat underwhelming in this offense. I still don't think Bo Nix is that great, despite a pretty impressive performance against the Raiders on Sunday, but I didn't think there was going to be a massive drop-off from Bo Nix to Dylan Gabriel, and there still might not be, but I just haven't been impressed with some of these early results for Oregon. And what I first thought was growing pains. I'm a little concerned going into this one. 29th in pass blocking grade, 50th in run blocking grade. I just don't know if they're going to be able to keep Ohio State from getting into the backfield and picking up yardage with Jordan James and setting up the passing game. So while I like Oregon a lot, I'm definitely concerned about this one. Market has moved pretty aggressively towards the Buckeyes. Ohio State laying 3.5 with a total of 52.5. Nick, what are your thoughts on this one?
I agree with a lot of what you said, and I thought Dylan Gabriel was going to be just a perfect fit. Slide him right in, very smooth transition from Nix, and especially early on. I guess in last week as well, they had how many turnovers in the red zone? This Oregon offense has just struggled to put the ball in the end zone. The underlying numbers still pretty good, top 20 in a lot of the numbers that I care a lot about. Scoring, points per drive, yards per pass attempt, success rate, yards per play, all those in the top 20, EPA per play, top 30 in the numbers that I use. So still a solid offense, but Certainly room for improvement, especially when it comes to, capping those drives with touchdowns. Ohio State, as I said earlier, is at least the way that my numbers work, the best team in the country, the most talented team in the country. Our roster strength number adjusts for experience and career production. Ohio State's number 1 overall, number 2 on offense, number 1 on defense. If you look at just raw recruiting ratings, defensively, it's the number 1 team in the country in average 247 sports rating across the board, number 1 in rivals rating, number 2 in on 3. So very, very talented defense, playing like it, number 3 in the country in our team performance number, top 3 both against the pass and the run. And, the offense has been very, very good as well. I mean, Will Howard, in kind of my eyes coming in, was a little bit of a question mark. I mean, there's been plenty of chatter that maybe he just moved on because that Kansas State coaching staff fell in love with Avery Johnson, and he might end up losing that job. He ends up at Ohio State and hasn't put up huge numbers, but they haven't needed it. They've got the best running back duo in the country. Together, they haven't put up huge numbers, but they haven't needed it. But they also do have, you already mentioned Jeremiah Smith, arguably the best true freshman in the country. Ryan Williams certainly has a case as well, but just a next level talent, so incredibly fun to watch. But Emeka Egbuka, let's not forget about him. Had a huge week last week, still basically code number 1 in that offense, and the offensive line, which was a little bit of a question mark as well. If it wasn't Howard on the offensive side of the ball, it was, for me, the offensive line, and they've graded out extremely well. Number 2 in the country in our O-line performance rating. So this Ohio State team, what maybe might have been weaknesses coming into the season have not looked like it, at least in my eyes, or in our projections. This Ohio State team has no weaknesses. So even going on the road, even playing an Oregon team that is top 5 in roster strength, is a top 10 team in team performance, has a lot more questions, particularly rushing defense, a little bit of a question mark. They're basically FBS average at this point. And then the offense, as we said, just struggled to finish drives, score touchdowns. They're 15th, top 15. They're 13th in our offensive team performance numbers overall, but not even top 20 on either side of the ball. They're between 25 and 30 on passing and rushing. So I think that this Ohio State team is just a more complete team, and has, even though they haven't maybe faced the toughest slate so far, they've been very, very dominant, and the numbers, in addition to just the talent on hand, make me think that this Ohio State team is the best in the country. So I think they're going to be able to go in to Eugene and definitely think they have an opportunity to cover here, in addition to find a way to win.
So my concern with the Oregon offense is, going into this game specifically, how are you, and you mentioned the lack of finishing drives and putting the ball in the end zone, but where are the quick hitters? Where are where are you ripping off the field flipping plays? Because while I've actually been impressed with Oregon's defense much more than the offense, I know, again, strength of schedule notwithstanding, but still, just they grade out very, very strong across the board. But 116th in explosive rush rate, 97th in explosive pass rate on offense. I'm struggling to see, to beat Ohio State with that much talent on the outside, Oregon's going to need to scheme up at the very least, or rip off a few field flipping plays or touchdowns. And that just hasn't been there all year. Now, could they be playing, the possum thing? I had this kind of back and forth last week. Was Mizzou playing possum because their lack of explosives weren't there? They weren't playing possum. That's just who they were. And I know you can't compare Oregon to Missouri necessarily, but that's just my concern where I look at this is, okay, I actually think Oregon might be able to put together a game plan that can move the ball down the field. But if they're going to start settling for 3 and these drives are going to be 7 minutes long, do I trust Oregon's defense to really keep a lid on Ohio State, where it's probably just a matter of time? So now you go to the Ohio State side. I agree with you. I had my concerns about Will Howard. Maybe that was like part of what was holding me back, and I was higher on Dylan Gabriel relative. Howard's been fine. 5 big-time throws, 5 turnover-worthy plays. For what it's worth, Gabriel, 7 big-time throws to 4 turnover-worthy plays. My thing with Will Howard is there's nothing deep. Only 11 passes so far this season. 8% have been more than 20 yards down the field. I don't want to take it. I kind of lean towards the under. Maybe it's first half under, where it's a little bit buttoned up. Neither team wants to get a little crazy. So that's like my early thought on this game. Like maybe it's like an early under, and then like when the game breaks out, it gets going. My other thought, though, and maybe what's stopping me is, so Chip Kelly and Dan Lanning have actually matched up. Obviously, Chip Kelly, the offensive coordinator for Ohio State, Dan Lanning, the former DC for Georgia, and now is the coach of Oregon. Oregon beat UCLA, and I actually remember this game because it was back and forth the whole way. 45-30, not back and forth like Oregon was ahead the whole time, but both teams were moving the ball. In that game, Oregon outgained UCLA, but UCLA was able to move the ball just fine. They averaged 6 yards per rush. Obviously, a Chip Kelly offense. That was with Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Howard's a capable rusher. Zach Charbonnet was on that team. I just wonder, is Ohio State going to be able to spread out this Oregon defense with run schemes and move the ball and convert much more than Oregon? And that's really the difference in this game. What do you think there? I kind of threw a lot at you there.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And Oregon defensively in our team performance numbers is number 1 against the pass, but they're 67th against the run. And so Ohio State, with Travion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, an offensive line that's been, I think, a little bit better than expected so far. And Will Howard, as you said, who can run. It seems like a great opportunity to just sort of, pound it until Oregon proves that it can stop it. And right now, that's been a little bit of a weakness for the Ducks defensively and just sort of as a whole. So I think that, if Chip Kelly's thinking back to that game that you mentioned, or just sort of looking at how numbers wise these two match up, I think there's a real opportunity there for Ohio State to just sort of grind this one out if they choose to do so, and continue to move the chains and really ride that running back duo, maybe with Howard sprinkled in a little bit, and just sort of grind this game out and really lean on that rushing attack.
Yeah. Let's talk some Red River. Quinn Ewers expected to be back. Texas offense didn't really miss much, which I think is say what you want about Quinn Ewers. I'm not a huge Quinn Ewers guy in terms of like his draft prospects, but this Texas offense is, I don't think as good as last year, but is doing what's necessary. I think what is interesting about this one is how Oklahoma comes out of this one. Nick, I imagine you are much more well-versed than I am in terms of the Oklahoma injury report, given how lengthy it was. And I know how diligent you are in terms of keeping up with everything. Is OU going to be healthy enough? And with the transition at quarterback, can OU hang in this one? Because I do think the defense is legit. And it's why when I was doing the SEC preview, I was high on Oklahoma in terms of like a game-to-game perspective, and not necessarily like over-win total SEC contender because their schedule's so brutal. But this defense is legit. This Red River game always, and this is completely anecdotal and narrative-y, it just seems like it's never that straightforward. You got Texas laying 14.5, total 49.5. It just doesn't seem like it's I don't think it's necessarily going to be a blowout. I don't know if I have the stones to take it, but it just feels like this game always gets a little squirrely. Do you see it the same way, or do you think just Texas is completely outmatched, or isn't a complete mismatch, I guess, for Oklahoma?
Yeah. So usually my process is that I'll go through and log all the different projected point spreads each
Mhm.
week, throw them into a database, put them on our Discord for our subscribers to be able to use. And then I'll go and look at, okay, what do the odds makers say? What's the market? This week, because I was meeting you, flipped it a little bit. So I just went ahead. Okay, I'll look at the lines first, and then I'll add in the projections after. And I saw 14.5 in this one and thought, oh, well, obviously we're going to be on Oklahoma in all three models. There's no way our numbers, just sort of the way that they work in a matchup in a conference game, not even thinking rivalry, but conference game, neutral site, Oklahoma. As disappointing as it has been, still, top 25 in overall roster strength. You mentioned the defense being legit. They're number 7 in overall defensive team performance, top 3 against the run. The offense has been very bad, but Oklahoma still, the way our numbers work, even with all the injuries, which we'll see if Deion Burks is back. We'll see if anybody else can return in that wide receiver group. But it sounds like Nick Anderson's going to be out. It sounds like, don't expect Andre Anthony. Don't expect Jalil Farouk. We'll see. But yeah, the projection when I went and looked at it, I actually kind of yelped a little bit. I was like, what, Texas minus 14.6? Like, we're actually on Texas to cover here?
But you're pretty much, you're on the number though.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But just even that tiny little bit, we are officially, for grading purposes on Texas to cover, at least in one of the three models. And that surprised me a little bit. And that shows, I think, how strong this Texas team looks on paper, because I did not predict that model would have Texas covering 14.5 against Oklahoma. But Ewers sounds like he's good to go. I agree, not sure what his long-term future necessarily looks like. Jaden Blue, there's been a little bit of the running back room was a question mark, especially after the injury to CJ Baxter. Blue looked good early, but has had some fumbling issues in the press conference today. Steve Sarkisian, not committing to Blue even being the starting running back anymore. But the wide receiver room is deep. The offensive line grades out really well, top 10 in performance, number 1 actually when we account for both performance and the talent on hand. And the defense has been top 5 in the country in our team performance numbers. So this Texas team, similar to Ohio State in a lot of ways, maybe not quite elite, just raw recruiting numbers across the board, but still, top 5, but not a lot of, 2s and 3s and things like that. Nevertheless, this Texas team is legitimately one of the best teams in the country. No weaknesses, and Oklahoma absolutely has weaknesses. There's talent on hand, a lot of top 15 numbers, position by position in the raw recruiting ratings. But you look at how that's translated to the field, especially on the offensive side of the ball. They're number 108 in overall offensive team performance, number 114 in passing offensive team performance, number 92 rushing. You've got a true freshman quarterback, even though Michael Hawkins, gave this unit a little bit of a jolt of energy stepping in for Jackson Arnold. I just, I'm not quite sure I would want to go into this matchup against this Texas team with a true freshman, with an offensive line that has been disappointing, 121st in our O-line performance numbers. It's had its own injury issues. Defensively, as good as this unit has been, they've been dealing with injuries in the secondary, in the linebacker core. So I think, we've seen this particular rivalry. We've seen heavy underdogs win outright in this series. But this Texas team just seems different, and this Oklahoma team, unless they, are somehow able to grind this game down to a 17-14 type, final score. I just think Texas is probably too good, and probably will have an opportunity to run away with this one.
Isn't this just setting up just like the Michigan game from week 2, where Texas kind of just plays a buttoned up conservative style that eventually they find points, they force a turnover, short field, and all of a sudden Oklahoma's down 2 scores and they kind of just wash this away. Like, that's just kind of how it feels, right? Like, I don't know if I'm going to go and lay the points with Texas necessarily, especially with Georgia on deck. That kind of, it's almost like a weird situation setting up where it's like, well, are they looking ahead to Georgia, or are they like getting really up for this game and there's going to be a letdown against Georgia, or is it neither and Texas is just game? I think that's an interesting one. Really quick, just from last year, Texas, Oklahoma, obviously Oklahoma wins, a very, very different Oklahoma team. Texas outgained them in the game. They lost a turnover battle 3-0. Again, Texas 527 to 486. So nothing crazy, but a 4-point game. What was impactful, though, going back and looking, was Dylan Gabriel as a rusher. Ran the ball 14 times for 113 yards and a score. I wonder, I know it's a different offensive coordinator and everything, but I wonder if Seth Luttrell leans into that with Hawkins, maybe use him as a rusher. Maybe that's how you take advantage of this Texas defense. I got nothing right now. I just think it's obviously a super interesting game, but I think there's avenues, because the game is always crazy, to Oklahoma out of a bye, great defensive mind, maybe limiting this offense in Texas. And there's also avenues to where I just see the Michigan game all over again, and it's just like not that interesting. It's kind of more of a boring game, and we like look to something else. And so Penn State-USC. So I made a bad bet. I took the over in this game, and it was immediately pushed right back in my face. And maybe I'm underrating this USC offensive line struggling. I still am not all the way sold on this Penn State secondary. And I think that you can move the ball on them through the air. Penn State has been lightly challenged so far this season. And I think Lincoln Riley can come up with a game plan that can space this out and avoid running into the teeth this Penn State defense. On the other side, we saw in Penn State's lone, truly competitive game, quote unquote, West Virginia, we saw the deep shots, we saw downfield attacks, and I don't really rate this USC defense highly. So, Nick, are you also agree with the market and I'm kind of stupid for taking this over? Or you think maybe, hey, there's an avenue? I mean, listen, it's a low total. I know Penn State doesn't necessarily want to get into a shootout, but I do think if I got to trust Lincoln Riley to get over a total in the 40s, I'll do it. I'll put my money where my mouth is, guys.
Yeah. I was very surprised to see a Lincoln Riley, a game featuring a Lincoln Riley coached offense in the 40s. What was it when you bet it?
50.5. So it's not my finest.
Okay. So our projection is 48.06.
So you're on the market. I made a bad bet. They're not all good.
Well, so when we locked it in officially for the week, technically on over 48. So, so I'm with you. I'm hoping this one ends up as a higher scoring game. But this game in particular, it's interesting because last week, as I said, maybe the game I loved the most was Minnesota against USC. This week, I kind of really like USC.
Interesting. And market's one-way traffic, right? Like you could understand why, right? Like Penn State, another blowout win, USC off the loss. Everyone's going towards the Penn State side,
Sure. And numbers wise, it's not a huge margin in our team strength model. The line's 5.5. The one we use officially, our projection's 5.1. Basically, the Talent Edge model actually sees this as more of a toss-up. Penn State by less than half a point. The Stats Only model actually likes Penn State to cover, has the projection right around a touchdown. And maybe this is just leaning into one little thing that really doesn't matter that much in the long run. But I'm starting to pay a little bit more attention to these travel scenarios.
Yeah.
And it's a long way from College Station to LA, or not College Station, State College, excuse me.
Yeah.
My apologies. But also I just saw, a tweet from a Penn State beat reporter today about how Penn State has to bus 2 hours to get to a bigger airport this week because
a state college in the middle of nowhere.
Right. And the size of the plane they need for this trip, I guess, is bigger. So, does it matter that much? Maybe not. But it's a long way. It's a more difficult travel situation. It's an unfamiliar opponent. Penn State, as good as it has been so far, this USC team, I think, is pretty clearly the most talented team that Penn State will have played. They haven't left home in over a month. I don't know. I kind of feel like this scenario could be a good one for USC. Penn State's been a little bit banged up. They've had some injuries on the offensive line. At running back, Nicholas Singleton didn't play last week. They've had some injuries on defense as well, including a starter in the secondary who's been out for a while. So, this Penn State team looks really good on paper, top 5 in team performance, top 5 in defensive team performance. But USC, even, with last week being a real disappointment and losing a game where they had a significant talent advantage, seems like an opportunity here for USC to potentially surprise a Penn State team that's had to travel a long way and take quite a while to get there. So maybe there's an opportunity here for the Trojans, and for you and I. Hopefully, it's a little higher scoring.
I think if USC's gonna win, they're gonna have to flirt with 30 points, right? Like they're not gonna be able to win a rock fight with Penn State, because that's what Penn State wants to do. They'll shut it all down and they'll run the ball at a high clip. I mean, USC's rush defense is pretty poor in the year, averaging about 5 yards per carry allowed, and we've seen now Minnesota and Michigan do that to them. So I think where my root of my over bet was some of the concern about the Penn State secondary, and I can't unsee the Bowling Green game. And then I went back and watched some of the Illinois highlights, and while they only scored 7 points, this is going to sound silly, but Illinois was able to move the ball. It wasn't like it was a full standstill game. Like that game should have been more pointsy than the scoreboard indicated. And I also think that total closed around 48. So you're telling me this is the same total with a USC offense? And look, maybe the offensive line is just that poor and not Big Ten caliber. But I'm going to put my faith in Lincoln Riley. And I'm not even a huge Lincoln Riley. I rarely bet on USC, but I guess my way of betting on USC was taking the over, because I just think that opens up more avenues. So that was kind of the root of my handicap. Is I'm not all the way sold on this Penn State defense, and I think that their offense, when necessary, can get explosive. We saw it in the West Virginia game. So I think this game can get into the mid-20s if the game script dictates it. I think it can, because I trust Lincoln Riley here. All right, let's talk about you were talking about earlier, Nick, LSU Ole Miss. I bet some early LSU at over 3. So I lean with LSU. A lot of it has to do with the setup in this one. Ole Miss potentially on fumes schedule-wise. Injuries starting to mount for the Rebels. LSU off a bye, night game, Death Valley. Maybe I'm looking too much into the spot and not looking at what you are correct, by the way. Ole Miss, the metrics, they look incredible. They look unbelievable. And it's really the defense. But before I give you the word, I'm a little concerned that this Ole Miss defense hasn't played a soul on the like an opposing offense with a soul, I should say, because Kentucky and South Carolina definitely both elite defenses. I'm just curious what if LSU is able to kind of test this Ole Miss defense, because maybe you have this stat. I couldn't find it. Ole Miss seems to be picking up a lot of holding penalties in the secondary. A lot of like DBs grabbing the receiver. It happened against Kentucky, I believe, for 3 automatic first downs, and it happened once or twice, I think, against South Carolina. You do that against LSU, that's going to come back to bite you on the road like that. So, Nick, I'll go to you, and then we could go back and forth on this one, because it seems like we might be a little bit of a disagreement here.
So I don't have the penalty numbers in front of me. That's interesting though. That is probably something I should pay a little bit more attention to. I've seen a tiny bit of research.
I looked it up. It was completely from me just like watching. I don't even know where they rank amongst other ones, but it was something that stuck out to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think there's some value to picking up things like that. I'm obviously, I trust our numbers and lean on them very heavily, but I do think that there's some value to making note of something that you see with your own eyes, and sometimes it is more valuable than it might look on paper. So that's a really interesting note. That'll probably stick with me. But I guess to cut to the chase, I've got Ole Miss as a double-digit favorite in this game. In our team strength model, in our talent-only model, it's also double digits. Have the Rebels as a double-digit favorite on the road, which there is a home field advantage adjustment there. And then the stats-only model, which throws out all those talent numbers, and there's the argument that could be made that we are overcompensating for some of the portal guys that Ole Miss has grabbed, especially players who've been very productive, maybe at the Group of 5 level. So maybe our player rating is a little inflated. That was a worry of mine coming in, because Ole Miss is number 1 in the country in offensive roster strength, number 2 in overall, and also defensive roster strength. They're actually still number 2 overall in our power rankings, behind only Ohio State. So I worried a little bit, especially, we saw this team struggle against Kentucky, ended up losing a game that it shouldn't have, probably. So I do worry about that a little bit. I think that there's every possibility that we are just overrating Ole Miss, and it's tough for me personally to trust a team that we really have not seen raise its level of play to the point where we can trust it to win at an elite level week in and week out. So all that said, yeah, our projections are absolutely all over Ole Miss this week. All 3 models have the Rebels favored to win, have them favored to win and to cover, and in some cases by a pretty significant margin. And our numbers don't hate LSU. I mean, top 20 team, top 15 offense. The defense has been suspect. It's been better than last year, certainly, but it's more of an FBS average defense than a bottom tier FBS defense. But with playing without Harold Perkins, unfortunately, that's a little bit of a hit. Multiple starters on the defensive line are out. One of their top defensive backs missed at least 1 game, maybe 2. Sounds like Zy Alexander is going to be back hopefully this week. But LSU is dealing with some stuff. There's a couple of offensive players who have some injuries worth monitoring this week. It'll be interesting to see, guys like CJ Daniels and the true freshman running back Caden Durham, had
Durham
a huge performance
practicing this week.
Yeah, right. So I saw the reports. Daniels practicing, Durham practicing. Hopefully they'll be able to play and play it close to 100%. But just when I see a report, so and so practiced. Like, okay, well, that means that there's something maybe we should be worrying about, that, just actually being out there. is an accomplishment in some way. So maybe I'm searching for reasons to try to buy into our projection here, but this one in particular absolutely jumped off the page to me. That it was just unexpected to have Ole Miss favored on the road, in Death Valley by double digits. But historically, this has been a spot where, I really, really do pay attention. Our numbers are traditionally, they lean more to underdogs in all three models. And so when a favorite, is expected to cover, that to me is a fairly clear signal. We've got a decent track record. I don't have the hard numbers in front of me, but I don't know. This is a spot where I'm just going to say I may not believe it, but the signal is clear, and our track record, I just sort of have to trust the process a little bit. So for me, this is going to be one that I'm going to probably focus on this week as we're on Ole Miss, just clear, despite perhaps some reservation for me personally that the spot looks really good for LSU. But yeah, I don't know, wishful thinking maybe, but I feel like this could be an opportunity for the Rebels to show that it truly, that Ole Miss truly is bouncing back from that Kentucky loss and truly is an SEC title contender and playoff contender, and who knows, maybe even a national championship contender.
Yeah, to me, this is more spot-based than anything. And I do wonder, Nick, maybe you could provide some color around it in terms of Ole Miss's offensive line injuries mounting, and Trey Harris is dinged up. I saw a report today, paraphrasing, but if the game was today, we're recording this on Monday night, he wouldn't be good to go. He wouldn't play, which is obviously they have some other guys. They have Juice Wells. He had, I think, 10 targets and only 3 catches. Maybe Lane tried to force feed him against his old team, but if Ole Miss's offensive line is going to be up against it, just given they're kind of trending downwards at this point in time, there's one thing LSU can do, and I know they don't have Harold Perkins anymore, but I kind of wonder what his real impact was. I know he's really talented, but I wonder, is he as big of a loss as the name Harold Perkins really was? LSU grades out as the 14th best pass rush this year, and I know USC might not be the best comparison because their offensive line is looking kind of shaky right now, but in that Vegas game, LSU got to Miller Moss. Was late in the game they maybe slowed up, but there's a lot of factors for me in terms of, especially just coming off a bye for LSU, extra prep. Just brings me to the Bayou Bengals here as just a home underdog. I don't even love LSU that much, but I guess I love them this week. I just think this is just such a brutal setup for Ole Miss. Especially, you also think about the two teams they just played are maybe two of the most muck it up teams you're going to find. Like the two teams you just don't want to face, just a pain in the ass type where it's going to be ugly and physical and annoying. It's just a lot of avenues I feel like lead to LSU, but hey, no disrespect, we can still be friends.
Yeah, and add to it. I mean, you mentioned Ole Miss maybe being on fumes. Hasn't had its off week yet. Back-to-back road games is another thing. This is
and you're going to probably the toughest too. You're going to, Death Valley night game is that's as tough as you're going to have.
Rivalry game as well. So there are a lot of reasons to that I am a little bit worried about the projection here. A lot of the things that our numbers don't account for that I kind of wish they did in some ways. But we'll see. This is just going to be one where I'm just going to have to trust the process. It worked out last week, and we'll see what happens. But there's a lot of reasons to expect that LSU is going to be in position to maybe win this game outright, if not just keep it close. But the numbers absolutely love Ole Miss for whatever reason.
I need your process this week. Now I don't need it. I heard last week. I don't need it this week. So a few games we could go more rapid fire because I know you're obviously a dearth of information. I'd love to get a few words on a few games. So maybe real quick, I'll bounce a few. If you have other ones that maybe caught your eye, we could go back and forth a little bit quicker here. But Iowa, Washington. I played Iowa at a cheap money line. Washington off the win against Michigan. And we mentioned some of that travel for USC. Travel for Washington is getting grueling. Another team without a bye week yet. They go from Rutgers, from Piscataway, the birthplace of college football. They go back home to play Michigan. Now they're back on the road to play at Kinnick Field to play Iowa. Early start time, too. So this is going to be a 9 a.m. body clock for Washington. Just a brutal setup here against an Iowa team that I know they just got smoked against Ohio State, but I do think that this offense is progressing in the right direction. They're not as dismal as they were last year. I think the spot is brutal for Washington, and I also think you cannot overlook the special teams edge between these two teams. Washington, I believe S&P Plus has them bottom 5 in the country in terms of special teams. They're also bottom 10 in terms of penalty yardage. Iowa, you're always going to get a buttoned up unit there. So I like Iowa at a cheap money line. I think they could just win this game outright and take care of business.
Yeah, that special teams point is a great one. Washington 125th in our special teams performance.
So bottom 10, but point still stands.
Right. No, absolutely. Yeah. And I rarely even look at those, to be honest. So I was, that caught my eye as you were saying it, and then Washington top 20. So that's significant. You have me worried this week that we were just on the right side of some good spots last week, and it feels like maybe we're on the wrong side of some spots.
Don't worry, I find the bad spots. Don't worry, don't you worry.
Because our numbers have Washington favored to win outright in this one. So Washington, oddly enough. And this was one last week that I was fascinated going into the game against Michigan because I didn't expect Washington to be favored, but they were in our numbers. We had Washington favored to cover. But I went back and compared this season's Washington team to last year's, national runner-up. And in a lot of the numbers that I pay pretty close attention to that go into those team performance numbers that I keep referencing, this Washington team in a few significant ways is better than last year's team, which is just weird as a team that's 4-2 and a completely different roster, completely different coaching staff, lost so many draft picks, all that stuff. But this Washington team's playing really, really well statistically, but kind of like Oregon, but even to maybe a more extreme degree in some ways. Struggling around the edges, penalties, special teams, putting the ball in the end zone. So Iowa is a team that really punishes you if you make a mistake on special teams or if you don't, take care of scoring opportunities. So this matchup in particular, especially in Iowa City, now I'm even more nervous than I was. But yeah, we've got Washington favored in that one outright, at least in the team strength model, our primary model.
I have Iowa as a very small favorite. I'm 2.5, so I'm at market, but I like the money. Obviously, low total. Let's try and minimize some variance here. I have Washington as a top 30 team. It's more a fate of this matchup particularly sets up just really poor, in my opinion. And the special teams is what really kind of pushed me over the edge there. Another game I'm super interested in is UCF Cincinnati. Nick, I know during our Big 12 pod, we were all about UCF. We love UCF. I got some concerns about UCF. And Cincinnati, if you remember, was a team I was high on going into the season. That was a team I was kind of banging the drum for. And I think Cincinnati's actually looked pretty good. 2 tough losses, you could argue, could have won both those games against Pitt and Texas Tech. Yeah. Both one-score games. I believe led in the fourth quarter of both. I mean, tied against Texas Tech. But anyway, is KJ Jefferson hurt? Because it seems like he can't throw the ball a damn, and they don't even try to anymore.
Yeah. It was. I mean, he was one of those kind of like Dylan Gabriel. Just seemed like an absolute perfect fit, smooth transition. Body top wise, and the way that he can just be a battering ram. You don't like to make Cam Newton comparisons, but seemed like maybe the closest to that Gus Malzahn had since he was calling plays with Newton as quarterback. But yeah, he just hasn't quite looked right so far this year. And the passing numbers, absolutely not great. 71st in our offensive passing team performance numbers. They've really struggled defending the pass as well. So this UCF team, I felt okay about early on in our really, really sky high projections after the Sam Houston, the TCU wins. The last 2 weeks, I'm not loving it quite as much. So I do think that this UCF team is still dangerous. I think it is one of the most talented teams in the Big 12, and I think that Cincinnati is not. And so that, perhaps could end up working out. Cincinnati also lost its top 2 running backs its last time out. Corey Kiner and Evan Pryor left that game with injuries. Haven't seen, maybe I've missed something, but haven't seen any real updates on those two. And also weather scenario. I mean, this game is going to be in Orlando. There's a hurricane in the forecast this week. I mean, is there a chance this game doesn't even get played? I'm not sure. But that always can just throw another element into things, whether it's preparation, whether it's, guys worried about real life stuff instead of just football throughout the course of the week. So there's some reason, I think, for me to just sort of stay away from this one. But our numbers, 2 out of 3 models have UCF covering. The stats only model has a toss up basically. But the numbers that take the most talent into account see a pretty significant edge for the Knights in this one.
Yeah, if there's one thing going in UCF's direction, it is Cincinnati. Seems like their weak point is against the run. Outside the top 100 in rushing yards allowed, they allow about 5 yards per carry. Defensive line yards 115, so they're constantly getting pushed backwards. So maybe UCF doesn't matter that KJ Jefferson can't throw a damn anymore because they could just potentially run the ball. Cincinnati's offense, I mentioned to you in the preseason pod, I was pretty high on Brendan Sorsby. But if you're down Corey Kiner, that might hurt a little bit of your ability. Cincinnati is coming off of a bye, so we'll see if Kiner's able to suit it up. But a really interesting game, and good point about the weather as well. Last one I want to ask about power conference games, because I know, Nick, you're in the weeds as anybody. But Kansas State, Colorado. Is Dion onto something with this? Because if you go back and look, okay, so they smoke UCF, but there's a chance that their UCF win might not be aging as well as you think, because you're at the point in the season where you're starting to rework what's happening, right? And say, well, if this happened, but this team actually sucks, then what does that mean for the initial win? You know what I mean? You're starting to almost rework what's happening in your head. So UCF, if that win, even if you're still high on them talent-wise, isn't aging as well because they just got their ass kicked by Florida. Is Colorado really back? And then you think about Kansas State, well, what if they don't just fumble the ball and turn the ball over at will against BYU? Is this spread 4.5? This is an interesting one to me because I could see both angles of it because I'm not necessarily high on either. What do you think about this one?
So going back to our Big 12 discussion, as much as our numbers love UCF, they hate Kansas State. So that's part of it. It just feels like we're too low on Kansas State, kind of like it feels like we're too high on UCF. That ended up working out for us in that BYU matchup. I thought very early, very briefly, that it was going to work out okay against Oklahoma State, and then things quickly took a turn. But this is it's an interesting spot because K-State has been good, but they haven't been good enough for me to think that our preseason projection, which by the way had Kansas State in the 40s in our overall power rankings, or middle of the pack, or slightly higher than that in the Big 12. It hasn't quite gotten me to the point where I'm thinking, okay, well, we were just obviously wrong. This K-State team was just a slam dunk top 20 type team, and we were just worried too much about the returning production numbers, the talent numbers. This is definitely just a team we missed on. I'm not, I'm still open to that possibility, but I'm not quite there yet. I'm not quite ready to give up on that. And then Colorado is a team that I feel like we had a fairly realistic projection for. Our talent numbers actually really do like Colorado, have the Buffs as a top 20 team in overall roster strength. But this Colorado team is playing better statistically. I mean, top 50 in overall team performance. The defense has been better than the offense. I don't think anybody maybe saw that coming. They're top 40 in defensive team performance, top 40 in rushing defensive team performance. And of course, we know K-State, with DJ Giddens, with Johnson, wants to run the football. And even though the pass defense has been maybe not quite as good, they're still top half nationally in the team performance numbers. The offense has struggled, not been super efficient, to nobody's surprise, still not great in a lot of the rushing numbers throughout the course of the season, though I do think we saw a real step in the right direction running the football against UCF. Perhaps that will carry over a little bit down the stretch. But this Colorado team, Travis Hunter did get a little bit banged up at the end of that last game. I'm sure he's probably fine. I'm sure he's going to probably give it a go. But as long as he stays healthy, of course, he's one of the very best players in college football. And Colorado, I mean, love him or hate him, Shedeur Sanders is a productive quarterback. That certainly, I think, goes a long way. I think this is going to be a really competitive game. Yeah. And, our numbers do have Colorado actually favored to win outright. That surprised me just a little bit. But the more I think of it, I'm starting to come around to the idea that this is perhaps an opportunity for the Buffs to win in Boulder. Both teams have had an extra week to prepare, to rest up. I don't know. I has Dion fully figured it out? I'm not so sure. I still have I'm still skeptical in some ways, but the offensive line has improved a little bit. It's definitely not great, but they're 92nd in offensive line performance, not 100 and whatever. And then defensively, as I said, top 40 unit statistically speaking, that's a big step in the right direction. They ranked 119th last year in that same category for us. So this feels like a very, very competitive matchup. And quite selfishly, honestly, I'll be rooting for Colorado just because it felt like we were really out on a limb with our low K-State projection. And this seems like an opportunity, for us to score one in the upset column in that regard.
Yeah, so the reason why I bet BYU against Kansas State was I'm concerned about Avery Johnson passing, and I thought that BYU with Retzlaff could take the top off the Kansas State defense. And because I think their issues are in the secondary, but I actually just think it's the whole passing defense. Kansas State has the 8th worst pass rush grade according to Pro Football Focus. I don't even think they're that bad. It's just I was shocked when I saw it. I was like, oh my God. But you look, the Arizona game got away from them with a few turnovers, but I just think at the very least, Colorado has a high-level offense. At the very least, they could pass the ball as good as, let's say, any team in the Big 12. We'll leave it at that. At the ceiling, we can see how high. I just wonder, what if Kansas State falls behind by 10 real fast? Are they coming back? I don't trust this offense. I believe it's one-dimensional. Now, at the same time, can Kansas State get ahead and potentially kind of just salt this game away? Absolutely. But 88th in EPA per pass, 102nd in explosive pass defense, 80th in havoc. I don't really see the same Kansas State defense that we've come accustomed to. That, yeah, I agree with you. Numerically, I'm 3.5, so I show a slight edge to Colorado, but I think there's enough variance in this to, take a shot on the money line and say Colorado can win this game. I think it's a super, super interesting matchup. Nick, weeknight games. mainly in the Conference USA variety. For those listening on Tuesday, there is a college football game tonight. Any games stick out to you on this weeknight slate? There's 9 of them. I think it's 9. 9 of them. Obviously, Memphis, South Florida. We'll see if that one gets played. Obviously, if you're going to be affected by the hurricane, prayers up. But any of those games stick out to you by your projections? Anything just in off the cuff?
We mentioned it very briefly early on that our numbers really like Arizona State against Utah.
Yeah, they do.
6.5-point favorite. Utah is on the road in Tempe Friday night. And I try to, I usually don't mess with the numbers too much or do things manually that I know are going to impact them. But even though it seems more and more likely that Cam Rising is just not coming back anytime soon, I still have him slotted in as the starting quarterback. So he has a much higher player rating than Isaac Wilson. That gives Utah its strongest possible rating for us, just because I feel like in some ways, going back to our original Big 12 discussion, Utah was a team that we were underrating. So keep that in mind. I understand, even if you look at our numbers, we have Cam Rising as the starter. He's probably not going to play in this game. All that take into account, we have Utah as a 1.5-point favorite in this one. So see a pretty big projected edge there. The talent edge number, again, with Cam Rising slotted in as the starting quarterback. And our numbers are very similar to the EA Sports video game. There's like a 20-point drop off between Rising and Wilson.
Yeah.
And
can I just jump in real
quick?
Sure.
Sure.
At this point, do we even know what we're getting with Cam Rising? Like, are we? No. We're sure he's the same guy, right? Like, first of all, I think it's fair to assume he may not play again. And if that's the case, like, this to me is a number that implies that Cam Rising is going to play in the game. Maybe it goes to 7. I think that there's a world where he is just a shell of himself, because we haven't seen it this year. We don't know. And At least with Arizona State, we know the floor,
Yeah. And the injury itself is like a really bad cut on his hand, on his throwing hand. So it's can he grip the football? So if he is back, is he going to be able to perform at the same level that we were used to seeing? So the talent number, again, with Rising as a starting quarterback, our projection is Utah favored by 3. So this, I feel like we're still underrating Utah. That's why I try to give them as big of a boost as possible. I'm still a bit skeptical on Arizona State this season, even though I do think they're a much improved team. I do think that, for the long-term future is bright under Kenny Dillingham. So I worry that we're just a little too high on Arizona State, a little too low on Utah, but also, it's a trust the process situation. We've got ASU projected to cover in all 3 models in that one. So that's probably the highest profile, I suppose, weeknight game. And that's the one where our numbers, I think, send the clearest signal. We do have Utah State projected to cover against UNLV in all 3. I don't have a ton of confidence in that one.
I don't either. UNLV might run them. Utah State might be like,
they're bad. They're bad.
They're ass.
Even to a finer point, New Mexico State, we have projected to cover against Jacksonville State, which is finally rounding into what I expected to see now that they have Tyler Huff starting at quarterback. New Mexico State, I think, is worse than Utah State. So I don't.
That was to be expected. Utah State is like a different kind of ass. Like that's right. Like we had low expectations, but they're like really bad. New Mexico State, at least, like we were like, all right, you're probably gonna be terrible this year.
Right. So if we're just if you're just scrolling through our numbers, they're in the same bucket as Arizona State, but I don't have near as much confidence in those 2. So I would actually. I think if you were to ask me to pick one of these that I needed to bet, it would probably be Jacksonville State. I think that Jack State is rounding into form. They're going to be a very dangerous team moving forward. And New Mexico State is maybe one of the worst teams in the country. So that one feels like another, last week, what was it, 62-20 or something, Jack
Yeah.
State against Kennesaw State. I think it could be in that ballpark again. So I do not trust our numbers in that one.
If my look on that was Jacksonville State team total over, which the implied total is 38.5. So that would be like my look. Just avoid the points. Like I think Jacksonville State could run it. When that gets widely available, I would play. I'd play it up to 40. Honestly, just once this team gets rolling. And New Mexico State plays at a pretty fast pace too. They play 50th in terms of seconds per play, which that's just going to give more possessions. And clearly, this offense, they don't have a slow down button. They want to destroy you. So New Mexico State, you look at some of their results this year. They allowed 31 to Sam Houston, who stopped trying in the second half. They allowed 50 to New Mexico, who they have a pretty solid offense. Just going 48 to Fresno. I think they can really get lit up a bit here. Any other games, Nick, on the slate that jump out to you before we kind of wrap up here?
So there were a couple that did make me raise an eyebrow a little bit. I always pay close attention if our team strength model projects a different team favored. We've actually got West Virginia favored outright against Iowa State.
Don't hate that at all.
That one surprised me a little bit. And like I said about the Ole Miss game, I do pay attention when all three models have a favorite projected to cover. That's a fairly rare situation for us. And there's one other that fits that criteria this week. It's actually Georgia State -2 against Old Dominion. So Old Dominion's had sort of a rotating cast of characters at quarterback. They've had some injuries there. Georgia State, you're not totally sure what you're going to get. Still new coaching staff, a lot of new pieces, still kind of figuring everything out. But at least our projections have the Panthers covering in all three models. And traditionally that's been a decent situation for us. So
lineups.
I think those are the two that jump out to me, numbers wise, at least.
All right, great. And then Nick, before I let you plug all your work, just a few more best bets for me. I could go a little bit faster here. The over in Northwestern Maryland on Friday night, 45 is good. Northwestern maybe getting on to something. Really good showing against Indiana. I thought I watched the entire game. Indiana, our Hoosiers still get the cover, but Northwestern moved the ball pretty nicely in that one. And you look at Maryland, where the state of their defense is, pretty leaky, especially on the back half. We've seen defenses or opposing offenses start to take the top off them a little bit. Maryland, I know they're coming off a bye, but this is a defense 91st in explosive pass defense. Only 23 tackles for a loss. That's outside the top 100. It's a low total. At the same time, I think Maryland with Billy Edwards can move the ball pretty nicely. Ty Felton's really coming to his own as well. So I like the over there. That's a Friday night game. Maryland top 30 in terms of EPA per play. So that's one. What else do I got? I mentioned Iowa. In the Iowa State-West Virginia game, I like the West Virginia side, but I went over. Iowa State hasn't really played any opposing offense that has a pulse yet, and I think West Virginia has a pulse on offense. That being said, what concerns me about West Virginia is their defense, especially the secondary. The secondary is looking pretty poor out here for West Va. We're looking at a defense that is, let me confirm this real quick, the second worst defense in terms of explosive pass defense in the entire country. And I think this Iowa State offense with Noel, Rocco Beck, the quarterback, can really take the top off. So I think low total, relatively low total, 51. I think both teams get into the mid-20s here. I think West Virginia is live, but I think Iowa State will get there. So I went over there. And then for the other ones we mentioned earlier in the show, played Iowa to cheap money line. I played -130. Took Arizona State +6.5. And the over in USC Penn State looks like I'm walking to a buzzsaw on that one. And I think that's one more for you. Middle Tennessee La Tech. Right.
So 2 of the 3 models have Louisiana Tech covering 4.5.
Why does every model love Louisiana Tech?
I don't know.
They're terrible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Middle Tennessee's been pretty bad too. But
I only needed to cover 4.5.
But the talent model, the talent edge model, has Middle Tennessee projected to win outright. So I don't have a great feel for that one way or the other. But yeah, I mean, Middle Tennessee is 131st in overall team performance. Omari Kelly's been good. Holden Willis, tight end, good college fantasy football tight end.
La Tech, second easiest schedule in the country, and they're still terrible. La Tech plays have been good to the pod so far this year. But Nick, you've been gracious with your time. Please tell us where you can find your work. Anything else you want to shout out before we get out of here?
Sure. I as always, appreciate the opportunity. You do a great job. Love coming on with you. You can find my work, all the team ratings, player ratings. I've got a whole bunch of info available to our C2C Winning Edge members at campus2canton.com. Campus to Canton also has a Saturday morning pregame show that I'm a part of each week. We do make some picks there, some prop plays as well. Also get you ready just for your day in college fantasy football. And Campus Canton has a ton more to offer in addition to my work as well for those of you who are playing, whether it's DFS, college fantasy football as a whole. But we also have tons of tools and information available that can be used for a wide range of things and might give you a little bit of a different lens to view certain matchups, certain players, get ready for draft prep, all that good stuff. So if you are interested in those sort of things, or if you want to learn more about some of the numbers that I've leaned on real heavily here that I refer to week in and week out, you can find out more at campus2canton.com and sign up as a C2C Winning Edge or all 22 tier member for access to our team profile, stat projections, our returning production database as well. Very useful in the off season.
Yeah, I use Nick's, especially the Google Sheet. It is a lot, but it really is super helpful. I really appreciate it. It's an invaluable resource. So please sign up for Campus Cannon. I know a lot of the good fellas there. They listen. They come on the show. They're great people. So make sure you're checking them out. You can check out my Twitter for all my random musings during the college football Saturdays at Reed Wallach. Find the plays on my betstamp at RW33 and in the Google Sheet below. That has all the early read show bets. Nick, thank you again. We're going to have to do this one more time before the end of the season for sure. But until the Wednesday show, everybody enjoy the early week college football games.